And joining us to talk transportation and long-term planning is Senate Assistant Majority Leader Chuck Winder. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Melissa.
We appreciate it. We know you're busy. I mean, it seems like this session, to me anyway, it seems like there have been a lot of surprises. People being surprised at the lack of a transportation bill, people being surprised at the career ladder going down. Why is that, and why does it seem so hard to get communication down between the different branches and the different parties?
Well, that's a big question, but I think there are several things going on. It's part of the process that is just natural for people as you're negotiating through things, even though, for instance, on the education and the salary ladder and that type of thing, the grid, whatever you want to call it, that's a process where all the stakeholders got together and, tried to come up with a solution, but there are some that believe it's not enough and they don't maybe like the way it's, put together. They ought to have more at one stage of it and a little less at the other. But I think that's a natural process, and as I mentioned before, you've got the three divisions of government out there that are dealing with those kind of natural tensions that we have. That there's a reason we call it checks and balances, because the legislative, judicial, and the executive branch have a natural reason to be concerned about what the other's doing and control what they do in a way. So I think it's a natural process. I think that this has happened in the various sessions I've been in, thinking back to the first one I was in, which was the second longest one. The main reason we were sticking around there was the governor wanted more funding for transportation. We stayed for, I think it was 117 days or something like that, and still didn't get any money for transportation, and everybody kind of went home mad. But I think it's just part of the process when you have this many people trying to negotiate with all the different groups that are out there and come up with a solution. It takes a while, and so I would have been surprised if there weren't some hiccups and bumps along the way.
But in a lot of these cases, and I'm thinking especially with transportation, this isn't a new problem. You knew this was coming, not
Right.
you specifically, but the
Well,
legislature as a whole.
Too. You
knew
say
it
that.
was
you can
coming.
point the finger at me too.
You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
But the different committees, the different stakeholders knew it was coming. And so why not come out of the gate at the beginning of the session with a plan? Why is it now we're seeing so many different plans and everybody's still on completely different pages years into the problem?
Yeah, and part of the problem is we have elections every 2 years. And for instance, on the House side, I think they had 30 new House members 2 years ago, and they had like 13 this time. So we basically had almost a complete turnover of 50% of the House. So you have to bring those people up to speed. We had an election last fall, so not a lot of attention was really given to, coming forward with preconceived plans. And just the way our legislature work, we're citizen legislators. We don't meet over the summers. We don't meet in the falls like a lot of states that have an ongoing legislature. So there's always this kind of ramp up time that occurs. And it takes a while to figure out. They started right out of the gate with different proposals, trying to figure out where the sweet spot was and how much it would be and under what process. So it started early in the session this time. They just haven't gotten there yet, and that's not really too unusual.
And speaking of transportation, this is something that you know a lot about. You were the head of the board for ITD, right?
Correct.
And you were also an Ada County Highway District Commissioner.
Right.
As you're looking at these different proposals, I guess you, as an individual, what would you prefer to see as part of the solution?
Well, I think the simpler you can keep it, the better for people. The people generally accept the user fees, which are the gas tax and registration fees. That could play out in the way the House brings the bill over. We don't know. One of the discussions was, well, maybe we just raise sales tax 1 cent and then get away from the grocery tax and do some other things to lower our individual income tax and corporate tax rates. So they were doing some tax policy with transportation funding with that 1 cent, but we still got down to about $100 million that was available for transportation. So I think it's a process that has been going on for a while. I think it's getting narrow in focus as to what's going to work, but I think when it comes right down to it, if they're going to raise any significant amounts of money, it's going to have to include, an increase in fuel tax, registration fees, a transfer fee on fuel when it comes out of the depots onto the trucks and things like that. But we'll never have enough money to do everything everybody wants us to do. And I think you need to realize that. And so what's being asked for right now is just money to really maintain the system and try and keep it as up to speed as best possible and make it as safe as possible with the funds we have.
And as part of the majority leadership team in the Senate, I imagine that you have been in discussions with the governor's office too. Can you give us a sense of what the governor is thinking right now? And is this going to be an issue where he makes the legislature stay until you find a solution?
I think, thinking back to the 2009 session when he vetoed a bunch of bills, including some of his own bills, as he got, frustrated with not getting anywhere with the legislature. I don't think we'll go through that again, and I don't think it's necessarily something that he would force us to stay or to come back for a special session. And the reason I say that, I think I'm optimistic that we're going to get something, and whatever we can get is going to be helpful. We've been digging a big hole for quite a while, and if we can throw a little bit of dirt in that hole, it'll slow that process down. And hopefully, when we come back next year and the year after, we'll be talking about it more, and maybe we'll have some solutions at the federal level as to what they're going to do. See if they won't provide some more money for, interstates in particular in our state. We'll just have to see how it all plays out. But I don't think we're going to get to one answer that's going to solve all the problem this session.
And with that in mind, we've talked about the status quo a lot, about 700 bridges close to deficient or in deficient condition, roads deteriorating. But what happens in the future if we don't address the problem? What's next?
Well, I think, I look back to the time period that I've been involved since the early 80s in transportation, first at the Highway District, then at the ITD Board. And, well, I can remember 15 years ago, the number was down in the $150 to $200 million range. And now it's up to $262 million just to maintain the system. It's over $500 million to provide for expansions and safety programs around the state. That wouldn't have to go on forever, but we've got to catch up. And then once we catch up, we could probably reduce it. But what happens next, I think, is it's going to take the citizens pushing for it. I don't think we're going to change the representatives in some areas from their resistance to it unless the citizens that elect them change their interaction with those representatives. So I think it's going to have to come from the people. It'll have to be a grassroots thing. One of the things that we saw when we improved 95, US 30 with Garvey funds, the accidents and the fatality rate just went down to zero in some cases. So the safer we can make the roads, the fewer deaths we're going to have on them. And so to me, that's worth fighting for. That's worth, coming out and saying we need more money. And hopefully citizens of Idaho will say we don't want to lose our kids. We don't want to lose our loved ones. Let's improve our roads and keep working at it.
So how do you have that conversation with the citizens and with your fellow lawmakers in a way that doesn't sound frantic, I guess, that gets the information to them and gets that grassroots effort going? Well,
I think that we're at a crisis in a lot of ways. There are bridges like at Cascade, for instance, that are restricted to truck traffic. It really needs to be replaced as quickly as possible before it actually does fall in. There are other bridges that are weight restricted that are, hurting commerce. They're hurting our farming, our ranching people, as well as our people that have, commercial businesses that ship on our roads. It's just part of our economy. People need to realize that. One of the things I learned in some of my transportation issues and classes over the years, the Soviet Union probably failed because they couldn't get their products to market. They did not have a good infrastructure. And because they didn't have a good infrastructure, their economy failed. And to compete in today's world, you need to be able to get your product from American Falls to Tokyo in a relatively short period of time. And if we don't have good roads, we don't have the bridges that allow the truck traffic and vehicle traffic to go back and forth, it's going to hurt our economy.
And we've heard this session that the legislature is better at crisis management than long-term strategic planning. When you're thinking about transportation, ideally, how long-term are we talking about for this ideal planning to make sure that we have safe roads that also help the economy?
Well, ITD and ACHD and other transportation people usually plan kind of one-year budgets, and then they have a 5-year plan. In some cases, they'll have a 10-year plan. Some of that's required by the federal government. Some of it's just required by their own policies. When I was at ITD, I tried to get them to look at a 50-year plan for the state of Idaho, which took some doing because you had to change some mindsets. And, you know, to me, I've lived in the valley for over 50 years. I've seen what's happened in that time period. So it doesn't take too much for me to imagine what might happen in the next 50 years. And we can't just have a 5 or 10-year plan that's going to address that future. We need to be a lot further ahead of it than that. So we don't end up like a Phoenix that now has to go in and buy subdivisions out to be able to build a road structure and infrastructure to move people and product around their market area. I don't think anybody wants to do that. That's horribly expensive. So the sooner we can get a better plan in place, start implementing that plan, protect the rights of way, start purchasing rights of way where we know they're critical, that'll help in the future and will reduce the cost to future citizens.
But seeing how difficult it is to get even short-term planning going with transportation, realistically, is that going to happen?
Well, it does happen. It's required to happen. That's why you have Compass, the regional planning agency. You used to call them MPOs, but Metropolitan Planning Organizations, that are made up of the local elected officials and school board people and the auditorium districts, those type of people that will come together, and they'll actually hear the different, plan needs from different communities and try, and in our case, tie it all together through ACHD and ITD. So that does happen. Does it happen everywhere in Idaho? No. But in the more urban areas, it's happening, and it's happening pretty well. Some other examples in the Cassia County area, there's a regional planning effort that goes on between Minidoka and Cassia County. They have a great planning process down there, and they all come together and kind of figure out where they want to invest their money and where they want the state to invest their money, and it makes it easier for the transportation board to support what they want to do because they've built this community consensus to get things done. So I think, some people would say, well, the state needs to do all the planning, but it really needs to start at the grassroots with the Chamber of Commerce's, with the school districts, with those, because they're the ones that are going to generate the demand and the need, and they're going to know their community better than a legislator sitting in Boise, Idaho is going to know. So it has to start at that level and work its way up through, the process for funding.
As we're still in negotiations on education and transportation, and we near the end of March, what would be an acceptable solution where the legislature can wrap up and say, we've successfully completed another session? Is it a success? Are you going to be satisfied if you go home with a small increase in transportation, if you have less than 7% an increase in education funding? I mean, what for you is that level that you want to hit?
Well, I think I don't want to go home without some significant improvement in the way we pay our teachers, for instance, and establishing this grid system that I think is important to the teaching community, getting the base starting salaries, getting that kind of, some people refer to it as a dead zone, people that haven't, they're kind of in that middle ground where they haven't gotten their MBA, they haven't, qualified for the next jump in their ladder, and they've been stuck there for a while through the recession and everything. And so I think it's important to get some significant money into that pot. When we made the holdbacks basically in the budgeting process back in '09 and '10. We promised that when we had the money, we're going to put it back into education. Is 7%, 7.4, or is it, 6.6, or what's the number that would satisfy me? Only speaking for myself, I think it's a matter of how you allocate the funds that's probably more important than the actual percentage of increase. But that's just me speaking. Other members would say, unless we're over 7%, we haven't kept our promise, and so on and so forth. So that'll have to be worked through yet. As far as transportation, I honestly would like to see somewhere in the $150 to $200 million range of new money brought in for maintenance and upkeep of our existing system. That will slow the deterioration down and hopefully will enable us over a period of time as our economy grows to be able to put more money into transportation. It'll give us an opportunity to see what the federal government's going to do with how they're going to fund transportation now in the future, because they need to make some changes too. So I'd like to see something. If we go home with 100 to 125 million, would I be satisfied with that? Yeah, I'd probably vote to go home. But I personally would like to see more than that because I think the problem is more significant than that.
Is that the same thing you would have said at the beginning of the session, or is that what you're saying now that you're seeing the political reality?
It's hard to say and to know how to answer that. That's what I've expressed to you as part of the political reality, I think, of what's going on. The solution that I would personally like to see is, you know, again, coming back to the career ladders and taking out some of the low salary levels that we have at a variety of stages in that professional ladder. I'd like to see us get more money there to pay our teachers better, and we're having trouble keeping teachers in small rural communities. And now when we say the minimum starting salary is $31,750 or something, that's what the state gives to the districts. The districts actually put more money into that, so that Boise, for instance, may be in the high 30s to low 40s for their starting, and as they have a higher ladder than what appears to be the state ladder. Meridian's a little bit behind Boise, for instance. Some of the other districts out in the rural areas aren't putting any of their own money into the addition to salaries for teachers. So if you have a starting salary at $31,750, that's what they're paying them out there in some places. It's no wonder they can't get them and keep them, and you know, because they're going to have that opportunity. Even the valley here, you can move from the Meridian system into the Boise system and probably make a 15 to 20% pay increase.
One last question. When are we going to be out of here?
Well, we set when we first came here as March 27th. As we go on further without a solution or an end game to the education and particularly the career ladder funding levels, that date becomes more soft, let's put it that way. So that, no, I can tell you this, no one wants to be here beyond that date, but if there's anything that's going to keep us here, it would be getting to a solution on the education, getting a bill out there of policy and funding that meets the demands of the public.
So, Senator Chuck Linder, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.